March 10, 1944. Ypsilanti, Michigan. The ground trembles beneath the thunder of machines. Inside Ford's Willow Run, plant a mile-long stretch of concrete glass and steel, the sound is relentless. The air smells of oil and metal. Sparks rain from welding torches as thousands of men and women move in perfect rhythm. Riveters, engineers, and line inspectors work shoulder to shoulder, their hands calloused, their faces streaked with sweat and grime. Above them, banners hang from the rafters, the B-24 Liberator, the plane that will win the war. At the heart of it all stands Charles E. Sorensen, cast iron. Charlie Henry Ford's production genius. He walks the line in his rolled-up sleeve stopwatch and hand-timing every movement. 63 minutes, he mutters to himself. That's the goal, one bomber every 63 minutes, each one a flying fortress of aluminum and ambition. The B-24 Liberator was no ordinary aircraft. With its high aspect ratio Davis wing tricycle landing gear and twin bomb bays, it could fly farther and carry more than any bomber before it. But what truly stunned the world wasn't its design, it was how fast America could build it. From the outside, the factory looked like a city under glass. Inside it functioned like a living organism, an industrial symphony tuned to war. Conveyor belts hummed like arteries, trucks moved like blood cells. Women Rosie the riveters climbed inside fuselages, tightening bolts with pneumatic wrenches. Mechanics tested engines on dynamometers that shook the floor. Out back, the finished bombers taxied out one after another, lined up like silver fish glinting in the Michigan sun. Thousands of workers, many of whom had never built a plane before, now lived and breathed aviation. They came from farms, coal towns, and factories, husbands, wives, even teenagers drawn by patriotism, paychecks, or simply purpose. Ford turned them into something new, a wartime army without uniforms. But across the ocean in the ruins of Europe, German officers could not believe what they were seeing on reconnaissance reports. Their Luftwaffe analysts, poring over aerial photos and intercepted intelligence, estimated that Willow Run's output figures had to be exaggerated. 1 bomber per hour, impossible. No nation, they thought, could sustain that pace. And yet, by mid-1944, the reports kept coming. American bombers swarmed the skies over France and Germany, thousands of them. Factories that once seemed untouchable were now in ruins. German officers began to ask a question that gnawed at their pride. What kind of nation could outbuild an empire? At Willow Run, that answer took shape every 63 minutes. A foreman rings a bell. Another B-24 rolls off the final assembly line, gleaming under the floodlights. Its name freshly painted near the nose, the Spirit of Detroit. Mechanics cheer. Somewhere near the hangar doors, a woman wipes her hands on her coveralls and whispers, "That one's for my brother, he's over there." Outside, a test pilot climbs into the cockpit. The Pratt & Whitney engines roar to life. The bomber lurches forward, gathers speed, and lifts into the Michigan sky, another piece of American industry turned into a weapon. No ceremony. No delay. The next fuselage is already waiting at Station 1. The sun barely rises over Willow Run before the factory's alive again. Floodlights blaze through the dawn mist, illuminating rows of parked bicycles and buses that have brought another shift of workers from across Michigan and Ohio. The clock never stops here. 3 shifts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Even holidays mean nothing. The war does not sleep, and neither does Willow Run. The cafeteria smells of burnt coffee and fried eggs. Thousands of workers queue for breakfast before stepping onto the line, punching their time cards in a steady rhythm, the heartbeat of American industry. Posters line the walls, "Keep 'em flying," and the man who misses work helps the Axis. The message is clear. Every bolt, every rivet, every minute counts. Inside, the plant motion rules everything. Assembly lines stretch farther than the eye can see. Overhead cranes move steel ribs into place, while pneumatic guns hammer in deafening bursts. Women in bandanas climb scaffolds like mechanics on a mission. One misstep could mean a week's delay, and somewhere in the skies over Europe, that could mean death. Supervisors walk the catwalks with clipboards checking torque specs and deadlines. A single bomber takes more than 1 million parts, yet every one must fit perfectly. At the end of the line, wings are joined to fuselages with a precision that feels more like choreography than construction. By the spring of 1944, the process is so refined that workers can assemble an entire Liberator in under 2 hours, from final riveting to flight-ready inspection. The line never pauses, only shifts. When one group finishes, another steps in tightening bolts still warm from the previous hands. They wear no medals, yet they carry the same burden as soldiers. Their battleground is measured in minutes and metal. Outside in the biting Michigan wind, the test pilots prepare the day's first flight. The aircraft shudders as the 4 Pratt & Whitney R-1830 engines roar to life, the sound echoing across empty fields. Dust swirls under the propellers as mechanics hold their breath. Each takeoff is a gamble. One mechanical error could destroy weeks of labor. But when the bomber lifts off clean banking east toward the morning sun, a cheer erupts from the tarmac. Another victory, small but real. Meanwhile, 4,000 miles away in Berlin, Luftwaffe intelligence officers spread aerial photos across a long oak table. They study the vast rectangle of glass and concrete labeled Willow Run. Reports estimate its daily output 24 aircraft per day. Oberst Hans Meyer shakes his head. "It cannot be correct," he mutters. "No factory can build airplanes like sausages." Yet the numbers grow undeniable. American bombers fill the skies in ever greater waves formations, stretching horizon to horizon. Industrial war has replaced the old art of attrition. Germany, for all its technical brilliance, cannot compete with this tidal surge of production. As Meyer studies the photographs, a silent dread creeps in. He realizes that what Germany perfected in tactics, America had mastered in machines. Across the Atlantic, President Roosevelt receives a report from the War Production Board. In 1 month, the United States has built more combat aircraft than Germany and Japan combined. The document lands on his desk with quiet weight. Roosevelt smiles thinly and says to an aide, "The arsenal of democracy is awake." By summer, the Willow Run plant will reach its peak, 1 completed bomber every 63 minutes. It is not just a number. It is a statement written in aluminum and fire that the age of American industry has arrived. By mid-1944, the world outside Willow Run had changed beyond recognition. Across the Atlantic, Allied bombers darkened the skies over Germany. Day after day, the drone of engines became the soundtrack of the war. From the Ruhr Valley to Berlin, civilians watched silver waves of B-24 Liberators and B-17 Flying Fortresses march across the heavens, leaving trails of condensation and destruction. To many Germans, it felt less like battle and more like a storm, one they could never escape. The source of that storm lay here on the quiet farmland of Michigan, where production itself had become a weapon. The Willow Run plant was more than a factory. It was a machine that fed on coal steel and human endurance, and it never tired. Railroad cars rolled in day and night, carrying aluminum from Pittsburgh, rubber from Akron, and engines from Connecticut. They left loaded with bombers, each bound for training fields in Texas, Kansas, and Florida, where crews learned to fly before heading to the European front. The entire nation was synchronized like clockwork. A truck driver in Chicago, a riveter in Ypsilanti, a pilot in England, each part of the same heartbeat. The scale of coordination stunned even Ford's rivals. Unlike the handcrafted precision of German engineering, American factories embraced repetition. Henry Ford had once transformed automobiles into mass-produced symbols of modern life. Now his company did the same for warplanes. The assembly line that had built the Model T was reborn to build the Liberator. The idea was simple but revolutionary: break down complexity until even the unskilled could master it. A woman who had never seen an airplane could be trained to install wing spars in a week. A man who had repaired tractors could fit hydraulic systems by the end of the month. The power lay in organization, not individual genius. Across the Atlantic, German officers began to see the pattern in intelligence briefings. A report from Luftwaffe headquarters in late July 1944 warned that American aircraft losses were being replaced faster than they could be inflicted. In one line, the report noted, "Enemy industrial recovery time negligible." The phrase haunted German strategists. Every B-24 shot down seemed to return and the next morning multiplied. Field Marshal Erhard Milch, the man overseeing aircraft production for the Reich, studied the figures in disbelief. Germany's entire output for a week equaled 1 day of America's. He scribbled in the margin, "We are fighting a nation of factories." Back in Michigan, Willow Run mirrored the tempo of the front lines. Sirens marked shift changes the way artillery marked time in Europe. Foremen moved like officers on patrol, ensuring every rivet, every weld met specifications. The slightest delay could ripple down the line, and Sorensen's stopwatch never stopped ticking. Workers talked about the war as if it were happening just outside the hangar doors. Some had lost brothers or husbands overseas. Others feared the telegram that might come any day. But they kept working, driven by purpose and fear in equal measure. "Every bomber we finish," one woman said quietly, "means fewer letters that start with, 'We regret to inform you.'" The spirit inside Willow Run became contagious. Cafeteria walls filled with photographs of loved ones in uniform. Mechanics chalked messages inside fuselages, "Good luck, boys. Bring her home safe." Those messages crossed the ocean, too hidden beneath paint and rivets, carried into the clouds by crews who never knew the names of the people who had built their plane. Yet in some strange way, they all belonged to the same unit. The factory and the front were joined by steel and sweat. As the summer wore on, the plant's output reached astonishing levels. Inspectors worked 12-hour days, quality checks ran through the night. By July's end, Willow Run had produced more than 5,000 bombers. Each one rolled off the line, gleaming under floodlights, its nose art capturing the humor and heartache of the home front, Betty's Dream Michigan Mauler, Liberty Bell. They symbolized not just might, but identity, a nation that had turned its creativity towards survival. For the men in Berlin, it marked something darker. They began to realize that Germany's defeat might not come from a single battle, but from this unstoppable tide of production. The factories of America were rewriting the rules of modern warfare. Battles could be lost, and still the machines would keep coming. Bombers built in Michigan would fall over the Rhine, replaced by new ones before the wreckage cooled. And behind each one stood an invisible army of civilians who had turned labor into power. In the skies above Europe, the effect was visible. German pilots who once boasted of shooting down 2 or 3 bombers a mission now spoke in despair. "You destroy one," a Luftwaffe ace wrote in his diary, "and 10 more appear. They are endless." It was not just the planes they feared, but the machine that built them. As autumn approached, the Allied air offensive reached its climax. From the oil refineries of Ploiești to the industrial belts of the Ruhr, the Liberators struck day after day, flying in streams so vast that radar screens appeared solid. Every one of those bombers had a lineage traced back to a mile-long building in Michigan, a place where time was measured not by clocks, but by takeoffs. And in Berlin, as the air raid sirens began their nightly wail, a general turned to his staff and muttered the words that summed up the new reality of war. "They are not fighting us with men. They are fighting us with production." By late 1944, the Allied bombing campaign was no longer just a tactic, it had become a doctrine. The American command understood that every destroyed bridge rail yard and refinery weakened Germany's ability to fight. But what truly crushed the Reich was not the tonnage of bombs dropped, it was the knowledge that the United States could replace everything faster than Germany could react. War was now an equation of output versus endurance, and the math was brutal. At Willow Run, that equation was written in steel and sweat. Every hour, another B-24 rolled out under the massive floodlights. Crews performed final tests, checking hydraulic lines, calibrating compasses, loading practice bombs. The bomber's aluminum skin gleamed in the morning haze. Engines thundered as test pilots lifted them into the sky, circling above the frozen fields of Michigan before banking east. When the factory gates opened for the next shift, new workers poured in lunchboxes in hand, as if answering a bugle call. The logistical web supporting the plant was staggering. Trains from the Great Lakes delivered raw aluminum by the ton. Rubber glass and wiring arrived from suppliers across 30 states. Each part fit into an intricate sequence, coordinated down to the minute by thousands of clerks and schedulers, an invisible front line of paper, ink, and typewriters. Mistakes could not be tolerated. A missing gasket could halt an entire line. A delayed shipment might ground dozens of aircraft. But Ford's wartime network had mastered chaos. The American home front moved like a single machine. In Washington, generals watched the production figures with awe. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding the Army Air Forces, visited Willow Run that autumn. He walked the length of the factory floor with Charles Sorensen and Edsel Ford, taking in the sight of hundreds of bombers at various stages of assembly. "I've never seen anything like this," Arnold said softly. "You're fighting the war as surely as the men overseas." To him, this was not industry, it was strategy. Across the ocean, the Luftwaffe's intelligence section came to the same grim conclusion. Their analysts compiled reports on America's aircraft output, comparing it to their own. In one stark chart presented to Reichsmarschall Göring, a black line representing German production dipped steadily downward, while an American red line shot past it like a flare. Göring, once so confident of air superiority, slammed his fist on the table. "We cannot bomb factories we cannot reach," he shouted. The truth was undeniable. The industrial heart of the United States lay beyond the range of German bombers, protected by geography, and fueled by an endless river of labor and resources. Inside Germany, workers toiled in underground facilities, assembling aircraft in tunnels lit by flickering bulbs. They struggled with shortages of aluminum fuel and even food. Skilled engineers were drafted into combat, replaced by forced laborers and prisoners. Each plane took longer, each mission costlier. Meanwhile, in America, factories like Willow Run were hiring more workers, expanding assembly lines, and experimenting with automation. The contrast was devastating. By winter, the Allies could field more bombers than the Luftwaffe could shoot down. Every time a Liberator was lost over the Ruhr, another took flight over Michigan. American industry had turned destruction into rhythm. What had once been an unimaginable goal, a bomber every hour, was now routine. In one quiet corner of the plant, a group of engineers discussed future designs, jet engines, faster fuselages, better armor. They were already thinking beyond the current war. The pace of innovation had become unstoppable. What began as desperation had turned into destiny. The United States was no longer just supplying the war, it was shaping the future. But there was another layer to this story, one less visible to the men on the factory floor. Behind the roar of machinery and the smell of oil lay a deeper transformation, a new kind of warfare, where victory depended not only on courage, but on systems planning and relentless precision. The factory had become the battlefield, and America had learned how to win without firing a shot. For the soldiers and airmen overseas, the results were tangible. Liberators built at Willow Run, bombed rail lines in northern France before D-Day shattered fuel depots in Hungary and crippled submarine pens along the Atlantic coast. Every mission, every sortie traced its lifeline back to the production lines of Michigan. And yet, for all its triumph, Willow Run demanded sacrifice. Workers collapsed from exhaustion. Some lost fingers or eyes to the machinery. Families fractured under the weight of 12-hour shifts. But they kept going because they knew what was at stake. A sign at the entrance to the plant read simply, "The faster we work, the shorter the war." In Berlin, as Allied bombers once again approached from the west, an air raid warden looked skyward and whispered every one of those came from their factories. He was right. The sound echoing above him was the voice of industry itself, a chorus that Germany could no longer silence. In January 1945, as the ruins of Europe froze beneath snow and ash, a set of intelligence reports reached the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command, in Berlin. They had been smuggled out of neutral Sweden through industrial espionage channels and carried devastating implications. Inside the envelope were production estimates from American war industries, aircraft tanks, trucks, ships' ammunition, all broken down by month. For aircraft alone, the figures read like a death sentence. The United States was building more than 8,000 combat planes every month. Germany's total for the same period barely reached 1,000. When General Alfred Jodl unfolded the papers, his face remained expressionless. He read in silence for several minutes before setting the report down. "It is as we feared," he said quietly. "We are no longer fighting armies. We are fighting factories." No one in the room argued. The Luftwaffe's representatives could only confirm what they had already seen in the skies. The air over Germany had become a grid of vapor trails, a sky divided into precise mathematical lines of invasion. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Willow Run plant was approaching its zenith. The war was entering its final, most brutal months, and every hour mattered. The plant's workforce had swelled beyond 40,000. Trains loaded with bombers left daily for the coasts, where they would be dismantled, crated, and shipped to the front. The once quiet farmland around Ypsilanti now echoed with the constant drone of engines being tested. Local farmers joked that the cows had stopped reacting to the noise. It had become the sound of victory. For the workers' pride mixed with exhaustion. Many had not seen their families in months, their lives consumed by the rhythm of the line. "We didn't think about sleep," one riveter later recalled. "You just worked and prayed your bomber would help end it sooner." The camaraderie of the plant was its own kind of military unit, an army in overalls. They read newspaper headlines about the Battle of the Bulge and the Allied push into Germany, and felt somehow that they were there too. Inside Ford's headquarters, the tone was equally relentless. Charles Sorensen's stopwatch remained a symbol of discipline. Each minute saved in production could mean hours saved in war. He kept charts on his office wall showing cumulative totals of aircraft built. Each day's output was logged with military precision. To him, those numbers were not just statistics. They were lives, missions, victories yet to come. On the other side of the world, the German response bordered on disbelief. A captured U.S. pilot interrogated near Bremen was asked about American aircraft losses. When he calmly stated that his base replaced lost bombers within a week, the interrogators thought he was lying. "No nation can afford such waste," one officer insisted. But when he was shown Allied propaganda photographs, rows of bombers stretching into the distance, the truth could no longer be denied. By February, Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights over England confirmed the nightmare. Airfields were full again. Factories in the United States had flooded the front with replacements faster than the Germans could shoot them down. For the first time, German officers began referring to American production as Die unendliche Quelle, the endless source. The B-24 Liberators that rolled out of Willow Run that winter bore names heavy with symbolism: Victory Bell Peacemaker, freedom's wings. Their crews believed these planes would end the war, and in many ways they did. Each bomber carried not only bombs and fuel, but the accumulated will of an entire nation. Millions of hands working in unison. From the miners who dug the ore to the women who riveted the wings. In late February 1945, one particular Liberator named the Willow Run completed its maiden test flight over Michigan. Reporters were invited to witness it. The plane rose into the gray morning sky, with effortless grace, sunlight glinting off its fuselage. Standing on the tarmac, Sorensen watched silently. For years he had fought deadlines, shortages, and skepticism. Now, as the bomber disappeared into the clouds, he allowed himself a rare smile. 1 hour, he murmured, and still not fast enough. Across the ocean, as Allied bombers roared over the Rhine and thundered toward Berlin, the full consequence of those words came to life. Entire cities were erased in a single night. German anti-aircraft gunners fought with courage, but the sheer number of planes made resistance futile. Industrial warfare had reached its absolute form, a contest of output, not valor. When the German officers who had once mocked American engineering read the final intelligence updates that spring, and they saw numbers so vast, they bordered on the abstract over 18,000 B-24 Liberators built. Willow Run alone accounted for nearly half of them. For the Reich's military mind, trained in precision hierarchy and pride, it was incomprehensible. How could a democracy outproduce a dictatorship? How could untrained workers, housewives, and factory clerks forge a force greater than any army? The answer was simple, yet profound. In America, freedom had become fuel. Each rivet tightened in Michigan was an act of defiance. Each bomber launched a declaration that tyranny could not match the ingenuity of ordinary people. By the time Allied troops crossed the Elbe and the smoke of war began to clear, the truth was undeniable, even to Germany's most hardened officers. The war had not been lost in the trenches or the skies, it had been lost in the factories. April 1945. The war in Europe was collapsing. Soviet artillery rumbled on the outskirts of Berlin, and the Luftwaffe, once the pride of Hitler's new order, was a shadow of its former self. Most German airfields lay silent, their hangars empty, their planes grounded for lack of fuel. The sky that had once been theirs now belonged entirely to the enemy. And that enemy arrived in endless formations, wave after wave, the drone of engines so constant that silence itself felt unnatural. In a cold bunker beneath the ruins of the Reich Chancellery, a handful of exhausted officers gathered around a crude map of Germany. The red line of Soviet advance was now only miles from the city center. Reports from the west confirmed the same American forces had crossed the Rhine and were closing in from every direction. Yet it was not the soldiers that haunted the officers most. It was the machines behind them. On the wall hung a faded aerial photograph taken months earlier by reconnaissance planes, Willow Run, Michigan. To men who had once believed in precision and superiority, the image had become a nightmare. A factory so vast that its assembly line looped back on itself, so efficient that it could build in one day what Germany needed a week to match. They had studied it, argued about it, even mocked it. But now, as the end drew near, the realization settled like a verdict. It was never their strategy, said General Kohler of the Luftwaffe, staring at the photo. It was their capacity. Another officer, once part of the armaments ministry, whispered, "They turned industry into an army." No one disagreed. Far away in the skies above Bavaria, the last waves of B-24 Liberators crossed into German airspace. They no longer met serious resistance. Anti-aircraft batteries stood silent, their ammunition depleted. Fighters remained grounded, their fuel long gone. The bombers flew at will, scattering leaflets as often as bombs. Those leaflets carried a chilling message written in calm English: Germany cannot fight what it cannot build. In the towns below, civilians emerged from cellars to watch the formations pass. They stretched from horizon to horizon, columns of silver engines glinting in the spring light. For many Germans, it was the first time they truly grasped the scale of the enemy's power. It was not just military might, it was industrial inevitability. Back in the United States, victory was already taking shape in numbers. By the time the last Liberator rolled out of Willow Run, the plant had built over 8,600 aircraft. Each had required hundreds of thousands of individual parts and millions of man-hours. The workforce that had begun with uncertainty ended with mastery. Men and women who had never touched a plane before 1941 could now build one blindfolded. They had not just built machines, they had built history. Charles Sorensen retired from Ford soon after the war ended. Reporters asked him what he remembered most about those years. He did not speak of engines or quotas. He spoke of people. They came in with nothing but determination, he said. They left knowing they had changed the world. For him, Willow Run was proof that war could be won by ordinary citizens who refused to stop. In Germany, post-war investigators later examined the Reich's industrial collapse. Their conclusion was stark: no amount of tactics, no weapon, no brilliance of command could overcome a nation that outproduced its enemy 20-1. The Allies had built not just planes, but infrastructure, logistics, and momentum. America had fought with time as its greatest ally. As peace finally descended, the bombers that had once blackened the skies were decommissioned, parked in neat rows across desert airfields. Yet even in silence, they told a story, the story of a factory that proved what a free society could accomplish when united by purpose. Years later, a German engineer who had worked under Albert Speer was interviewed by American historians. When asked what moment he knew the war was lost, he did not mention Stalingrad or D-Day or the fall of Berlin. He simply said, "When we learned they were building a bomber every hour." For him, that number had carried more weight than any weapon. It was the measure of a nation's will. In that single realization lay the truth that ended a world war. Victory belonged not only to the bravest soldiers, but to the busiest hands.